Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the second video about how to use Microsoft Excel to create spreadsheets. In this lesson, we are going to be doing much the same thing as we did last week. We're going to be using Microsoft Excel to create a spreadsheet according to some instructions that are given. Although this week you're given a lot less direct, visible instruction about how to do this. Last week I showed you screenshots in the instructions of exactly where you were supposed to be as you were creating your spreadsheet. This week there are no screenshots, just instructions of what your spreadsheet has to do. To begin, we're going to open up the SS2 assignment, and then we're also going to open up an instance of Microsoft Excel. And I'm just going to put these side by side. Here we have a blank workbook, and here are going to be the instructions. I'll minimize the screen and then drag it over to the side. Okay, so the instructions say that we're going to be creating a spreadsheet in landscape mode. That first instruction is really important because that's something we haven't done yet. To get to landscape mode, if you go to page layout and then you change the orientation of the page, normally the page is vertical because spreadsheet may be taller than it is wide, but this tells you that today's spreadsheet is actually going to be wider than it is tall. So if we want to print it out, we want to be able to print it out in landscape so the page is horizontal. You'll notice when you click on a new orientation that if you scroll around in your spreadsheet, you see these dotted lines that show you where the edges of the new page are. So as you're entering information, you'll know what information in which cells will print on which page. The other way to do that is to go to View and then choose the page layout view. That will show you what the pages look like as well, and it also gives you the opportunity to add headers and footers. In this case, we're going to put our name in the footer right away because that's a requirement for this assignment also, that you have your name on the spreadsheet so that I can see whose it is. All right, I'm going to go back to View and then back to the normal view so I can just view the regular spreadsheet. To do that, I actually have to click out of the footer. Now it's saved my name down there. Click normal view, and then I'm ready to begin working on the spreadsheet project. I see in the instructions there's all this information that I need to enter in my spreadsheet, and some of it's a little complicated, so make sure you stick with me and pay attention. We're going to complete this worksheet for a 12-month period, even though I'm only given my salary and expenses for January, but keeping in mind that my salary and expenses are going to stay the same for month to month, except if you look at the instructions, I'm going to get a raise in July of 4%, so I have to pay attention to that, and my expenses are going to go up 6% starting in June. So I've got those changes that I need to work in here. And then the rest of the instructions basically just say that I'm going to need to use formulas in Excel to calculate everything that I need to calculate. So hopefully that gives you an idea what we're going to be doing in this assignment. We're also going to need to make sure everything's formatted nicely when we're finished with this. But here's the thing. With this assignment, because the instructions aren't 100% clear on spelling out exactly what you need to do, yours may look a little bit different than mine does at the end because you may lay things out a little bit different. That's okay on this assignment as long as your spreadsheet uses the correct formulas and does the right calculations. All right, let's get started. And the first thing I do on every spreadsheet, I type a title at the top so somebody else looking at this spreadsheet would know what the spreadsheet's all about. We're going to call this one 2017 Budget. Okay, so I'm making a personal budget for myself. And then in spreadsheets, whenever you enter a new type of information, it's always good to leave an additional row. So I'm going to leave a row between my title and the beginning. And then the very first thing I'm going to enter for my budget is my salary from month to month. So I'm going to type salary. And then as I look at the instruction sheet, it looks like the word January should go right next to salary. And then right below that should probably be $6,500 according to the instructions. Now, I could leave it like that, but looking at this, January doesn't just refer to my salary. Right now, being next to the word salary, it looks like my salary is going to be copied from month to month to month. But really, January applies to more than just the salary. January also applies to income and expenses. So I don't want January to be tied into the same row as salary. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on the word salary, and notice what I'm doing here. I'm going to hover over anywhere in the border of this cell, that green border. Notice that the cursor changes from the big white plus to the four-sided arrow. If I click and drag when it's that four-sided arrow, I could drag the contents of that cell and actually move them somewhere else in the spreadsheet. I'm going to move them down one cell so that salary applies to the number and not to the month in that row. Okay, so now I've got my salary for January is $6,500. I'm also going to have several lines of gross income. I'm going to skip a line to make it look neater. And then gross income is going to include a bunch of things that will be taken out of my pay. So these are my gross income calculations. Different taxes are going to get removed from my salary. I'm going to pay 6.5% in Social Security tax. Let's just see what this does in a second. I'm going to just enter 6.5 for now. For Medicare, I know that it's going to be 1.75. I'm not going to enter a number there yet, but I am going to type federal tax, and I'm going to type state tax. Now, if you were doing this, you may have just entered the numbers right away, but I want to show you what happens. I'm going to change the 6.5 to a percentage because I want it to format as a percent. To do that, I'm going to go back up to the Home tab. And remember all the number formats here? Here's the percentage format. Look what happens when I click on changing this to a percent. Whoa, 650% would be a lot to pay in Social Security tax. The reason that it does that is because, remember, a percentage is always a part compared to a whole. And Excel just automatically assumes when I have a number already entered that the whole is 1. So when it compares 6.5 to 1, it's going to actually multiply that by 100 and change it to 650%. I want you to just, if you didn't follow that, think of it this way. Whenever you change a number to a percentage, you multiply that number by 100 to change it to a percent. So 0.25 is 25%. It's 1/4 of something. 0.5, if you multiply that by 100, it becomes 50%. And that's what Excel did here. It multiplied by 100 to change it to a percent. Now, there's an easy fix for this. If I would have, instead of typing numbers in already there, if I just select this whole region and select that I'm going to make it percentages, now that it's formatted as percent, I could just type the percent. 6.5 becomes 6.5%. Down here, Medicare is 1.75. Federal tax is 15, and state tax is 7.1. Now, you notice something else disturbing happened. My 6.5 changed to 7, and my 1.75 changed to 2. What you need to do is make sure you're displaying the correct number of decimals. Now, notice that in the formula bar, it still says 6.5. When I click on cell B8, in the formula bar, it still says 1.75, but it's set to only display to the nearest whole percentage. What you can do is go up to this button that increases the decimal right here, and if you click that once, now it shows my entire 6.5. For Medicare, I have to click it twice, and that shows my entire 1.75. For state tax, I have to click it once. Make sure you display all of the decimal places by increasing the decimal. Don't display extra decimal places. So if I accidentally increase, so it displays 15.0, I can click this decrease decimal and it gets rid of the extra 0. Those buttons, by the way, just control what displays. They don't actually control the calculations. If I would have been doing calculations with the 7%, even though it was actually 6.5%, it would have multiplied by the correct number. It knew that it was 6.5 there. All right, let's enter some more information here. So after my gross income, I'm going to have a line of net income. I'm going to skip a line, and then I'm just going to type net income. That's going to be my income minus taxes. So the actual amount that I get to take home with me after paying all of the taxes on my income. Let's see, the next line down is going to be expenses. And then I'm going to have a whole bunch of specific expenses I need to enter, like rent and utilities, my car payment, my credit card, my groceries, student loans, clothing, entertainment, and my cell phone. Okay, and just noticed credit card was missing a D. I'll fix that. And what I just did is I entered all of these different expense amounts by using a formula in this spreadsheet. What's going to end up happening is if these expenses change, I can go back and change the numbers in the expense column, and it will automatically recalculate based on the new numbers that I enter. Okay, I'm also going to have at the bottom here total expenses. Notice on the sheet it just says total, but I'm going to make it extra clear by writing total expenses. And then anything that I have left over from my take-home pay after I've spent my total expenses is going to go into savings. And that's the basic layout of the spreadsheet. Now, I'm going to first of all start to make my columns a little more manageable. And then I'm noticing something else here. I want to enter a bunch of numbers in this column for rent and utilities and car payment, all that stuff, but I've got all these percentages right here in the same column. That's not really going to work. I have to move this January salary amount over one cell. Do you remember how to do that? To do that, you just hover over the border until your cursor changes to the four-sided arrow, and then you can just click and drag and move it over one. What this will do is it allows me to enter an entire row of January income and expenses without these percentages that have to be here getting in the way. All right, let's quickly enter all of the first month's expenses. $800 for rent, $250 for car, $125 for credit card, $500 for groceries because we're hungry, $150 for student loans, $200 for clothing, $250 for entertainment, and $65 for the month for my cell phone. All right, that's all the data entry that I really have to do up to this point. There's a little bit more where we're going to have to enter a few more percentage numbers as we go along. But for right now, that's all the data entry. Pretty much everything else in the spreadsheet is going to be done with formulas, taking these first numbers that I typed and manipulating those numbers to calculate what needs to be calculated. All right, first off, let's get my gross income calculated. I should say my net income. How much money am I actually going to make? And to do that, we're going to remove these taxes from my original January income. To do that, let's write a formula in this cell to calculate Social Security tax. How much is going to be removed from my paycheck if 6.5% of my paycheck goes to Social Security? Well, remember to start a formula, you start by typing equals. Then you can select the amount that we're going to be calculating with. This is going to start with C4 in my spreadsheet. So I'm going to click C4. This is going to equal C4 times 6.5% is the amount for Social Security. Okay, and I'm just going to hit enter there. $422.5 seems reasonable because consider this. 6.5% is less than 10%. 10% of 650. I'm sorry, 10% of $6,500 would have been $650, and this is less than that, a little less than that. So make sure you're always checking your calculations to make sure that the numbers basically make sense logically in your mind. If this was $4,000, I would have known that I did something wrong. Okay, let's just see what happens if I were to take this and copy it across to the other months, because eventually we have to make sure we fill out an entire year's worth of data here. So if I were to take this 422.5 and start going across the page, it becomes a bunch of zeros. Why is that? Why is it no longer calculating the correct amount of the Social Security? Well, first of all, I need to make sure I click and drag this salary over, right? Because I need to be making $6,500 a month. Notice when I click and drag the salary over, because it was just a single number, it knows to just copy that exact same number over. But Social Security still isn't right. It looks like government's taking $2.5 million away from me in February, and then after that, it's just this astronomically large number. What's going on here? Well, look at the formula that's in each of these cells that I filled over using the fill handle. First of all, this one was right, but then when I went over to February, notice that in February it multiplied D4, which is correct. I wanted to multiply my income in February, but it multiplied it by C7 instead of multiplying by B7, which is the percentage tax amount. How can I make sure that all of these always multiply by B7 instead of multiplying by a relative cell that changes every time I drag it over? Remember, that's when we use those absolute cell references. So I'm going to go back to my January Social Security cell, and I'm going to click within this B7 up here in the formula bar, and I'm going to press F4 on my PC or Command T on a Mac. And I'm going to change it to an absolute cell reference. Notice the dollar signs in it. So now when I fill this over, the C4 will change to the next column. It's going to go D4 and then E4, then F4. But the B7 is always going to remain the same. It's always going to multiply by the Social Security tax. Now notice that those numbers are all correct. The next thing I need to do, I'm going to do the same thing going down here for the rest of these, but if I click and drag this fill handle, a couple of things are going to happen. Now again, these numbers just don't look right. Let's click and see what's going on by looking at the formula bar. This one took C5 because I clicked down a cell, and it's multiplying it still by B7. That's not really right because now I want to multiply by B8, the Medicare tax amount, and I want to do that to the salary row, not C5, but C4. At this point, it's probably best just to click around in the formula and change things in the formula bar. So notice I clicked within the formula bar and I'm making changes. I want it to be C4 times B8. I want this federal tax to be C4, I want my salary amount, times B9. I want to multiply it times the federal tax amount. And I want the state tax amount to be C4, my income again, times B, in this case I want it to be B10. Okay? Notice I just went through and I manually changed those formulas so that they were what I would expect them to be to calculate the correct amount. And I'm going to click all of these and drag them over, and we should see that the tax amounts are the same every month. These are what are being deducted from my income. Okay, now, why did we stop at June? The reason for that is because, remember, I get a raise in July, which is pretty awesome. I'm going to get a 4% raise. So I'm going to drag over the rest of the year through December. And then I need to make this raise happen. Let's see. In July, I'm going to get a 4% raise. So let's just take my June income and raise it by 4%, right? How do I do that? Well, remember, to multiply by a percent, I have to enter into my formula, instead of 4, it's going to be 0.04. Because the percentage number, 4%, is 100 times bigger than the actual number that I multiply by, 0.04. So I'm going to take 0.04 times my June income. Let's see what happens when I do that. Ooh, that number is way too small. That's 4% of what I made in June, but I'm still making what I made in June plus an additional 4%. So how am I going to do that? Well, what if I just added back what I made in June? Because I make what I make in June, H4, plus 4% of H4. Does this formula make sense? I made my June income plus an additional 4% of my June income. If I hit enter, that is the amount that I'm making now that I got my raise. Hey, can I just use the fill handle and drag this over to fill to the end of the year? By now you should recognize that that's not going to work for me. That'll be problematic. Because if I drag this over to August, it's going to multiply by the July amount because it shifts the column over. If I drag this over to September, the September one is going to multiply by the August. It's giving me a 4% raise each month, which would be really nice, but it doesn't happen that way. What do I need to do? I need to make sure that it's just always giving me a raise on my June income. Every month after June is going to be 4% higher than just the June income, not 4% higher than the previous month. So to make these always refer to my June income, I'm going to use the absolute reference by pressing F4 or Command T on both of these references here. Oops. Click there. I'm going to command that. So there we go. I have absolute cell references always referring to cell H4. When I click enter, notice it's the same amount for July. When I drag it over, it stays correctly the same amount because each of these is referring back to H4 like it should be. All right, and then I should be able to click and drag. Now, remember, this doesn't have to change the reference. The tax amount that's being taken out isn't going to be different. It's always going to be the same percentage, regardless of what my income is. So it's still going to be 6.5%, but notice that because 6.5% of my raised income is greater, this is going to jump up a little bit as I fill it over. Notice that in July, now instead of $422 going to Social Security, it's $439. But as I click and drag this over, it should remain the same for the rest of the year as what it was in July. Notice that these aren't increasing by a percentage each month or anything. It's staying the same amount because it's always multiplying toward my income for that particular month. Okay, so that's how you fill out that part of the spreadsheet. The next thing we're going to do is expenses, and that's going to happen the same way. I'm going to grab these expenses and click and drag them over through May. But then remember what happened? In June, my expenses go up uniformly by 6%. So I need to enter a formula that's going to raise my expense amount by 6%. We're just going to do that the exact same way we did our raise. It's going to equal my expense from the previous month, G15, and then I'm going to multiply that by 0.066%. If I hit enter right now, it gives me a really small number, remember, because 6% of 800 is $48. But I need to add back in the original G15 amount because it's 6% more on top of what I was already paying. And that's the new amount. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag and fill this down. And notice that it raises each one by 6%. The problem is the same as with salary. I can't just click and drag this over because it's going to go up 6% each month. So here's what I'm going to do instead. Now that I've got these set up, I'm just going to use the formula bar. And remember, we're going to make this reference absolute because in both cases here, because I always want to raise 6% above what it was in May. So I'm always going to refer back to May. And I'm just going to do that for each formula going down the page. I'm going to make these absolute, so when I click and drag over, it will multiply the right amount. Let's see, I need to make sure that I change both references in each formula to an absolute reference, otherwise it's not going to work. There I hit enter before I change them both. We'll immediately know whether this worked or not because when we look, what we should see is that the expenses up through May are the exact same, and then they jump in June. But then for the rest of the year, they should be that same new amount. So let's click and drag this over to December, and notice that that's exactly what happens. The expenses are the same up until May, and then for each expense item, they become just a little bit more expensive as we go into June. All right, we're ready to start doing some totaling for these items. Now, let's start up here with net income. Now, I'm going to do something that's going to be a little bit of a deviation from the instructions just to make this a little easier. You can do this if you like. It doesn't matter how you get your end result as long as you get the correct end result using formulas. I'm going to actually insert a row. So I'm going to click in the row that I want to insert a row above. I'm going to click somewhere in row 11. And remember, on the Home tab, I'm going to go over to Insert. I'm going to choose Insert Rows. I'll insert a row above. And I'm just going to make a row called total deductions. These are deductions from my pay because of taxes. And I'm going to use the auto sum tool. So I'm going to click right below this column of 4 deductions from my income. All of this money is going to be taken out of my $6,500 paycheck. All this money is going to go. I'm going to add up all that money that's being taken out for January. Notice when I hit the auto sum button way over here on the right, it knew that I was trying to calculate the sum of the 4 cells above the cell that I was currently in. So I'm just going to hit enter there, and it adds up those 4 cells. And then I'm going to click and drag this all the way to the end to add up all of the tax amounts that I'm paying for the entire year. Notice that my total deductions now are the sum of these 4 cells. And now I'm going to take this money out of my pay. The way to do that in the net income, which is how much money I actually have to take home after that money gets deducted, I'm going to type this formula. It equals the salary amount for January to start. It equals the salary amount minus the deduction amount. So it's going to be C4, my salary, minus C11, which is what's being taken out. And that's going to be the same all the way across the board. My net income is always going to be the salary for that column minus the deductions for that column. So I can just click and drag that to the very end of the page. And that's my net income. Now notice once again, my net income stays the same all the way up through June and then jumps a little in July because I got a raise. Some of that raise went into increasing my salary, but remember, some more money is going to be taken out by each of these, so this was a little bigger as well, but I do end up taking home more money because of my raise. We're going to do the same sort of thing with total expenses. I'm going to click in the total expenses row, and then I'm going to click the auto sum button, and look what happens. It knows to add up the numbers that are immediately above the cell where I chose to auto sum. But here's the thing. Notice that there's an extra cell that's selected. C24 doesn't really need to be selected because it's going to be blank all the way across. Now you could leave it selected if you wanted to. Because it's blank, it's not going to add anything extra. However, the clean way to do this is just to click and drag the cells you actually want to add. And I actually want to add just these cells. If I hit enter, it'll add up those total expenses. Now it's adding up all of the money I'm spending on these different things, and I'm going to click and drag across the page using the fill handle to fill those expenses all the way across. Let's see, somehow I lost track of my cursor, so I'm just going to continue that, and there it is. Notice again, my expenses stayed the same up through May, and then they increased starting in June across the rest of the page. Now let's see how much I get to put into my savings. Remember, savings is anything I have left after I spend my expenses. So it's any part of my net income. Remember, net income already has the taxes out, so any part of my net income that I don't spend. To find that, that's going to be a formula again, equals the net income amount, the amount of money that I have after all those taxes are taken away, minus everything that I spend. And that should give me the amount that I have left over to go into savings. And again, I'm going to click that across the page. All right. The last things that we need to do is we need to find a couple of totals. So I'm going to type the word totals up here. And then also percentages to figure out the percent of income that's going to different places. Now, looking at the way that this is formatted, I don't really need my total salary. I could easily figure out my total salary, but I don't need that. I don't need my total amount that's deducted. All I care about is the total income that I actually made. So I'm actually going to click these two and drag them down so they're right above net income. Because I'm going to actually total my net income right now. And again, if I just click the auto sum button at the end of this row, Excel automatically knows that I'm trying to add up all of my income for the year. And my take-home income for the year after taxes were removed was about $55,500. So that's a pretty good amount of income. Then I'm going to add up all of my expenses the same way. I'm just going to add the rows all the way across. So if I click right here and I click auto sum, it'll add up how much money I spent on rent for the entire year. It's adding up this row. If I hit enter, it was about $10,000. And I could click and drag this down all the way through all of the expenses. And it tells me how much I spent on these various items for the entire year. I'm going to do the same thing for total expenses. This is the total amount that I spent on things during this year. And then we're going to do the same thing for savings as a total amount that I saved for the year. All right, so I've just auto-summed rows to figure out the total amounts of things. Now I need to find the percentages. Let's find the percent of my net income that all of this different stuff accounts for. Now, again, remember, I'm not using these numbers up here because this is percentages that were already taken out of my income. I'm only concerned about my net income. So what percent of my net income did I spend on rent and utilities? Well, remember how to calculate a percent? It's always the part divided by the whole. So to enter a formula, I'm going to say it equals this part divided by my total net income, the whole. Now let's just think about this for a second. I'm going to do this for all of the different expenses, for my total expenses and for my savings. I'm going to be calculating these percentages. Are there any of these numbers that I'm going to always be using in this division problem? Is there a number that's always going to be the same? Hopefully by this point you're able to pick out that I'm always going to be dividing by the total net income for all of these. It's always going to be dividing by this number here, because I'm always comparing all these to the total amount that I made. So I want to make sure that this 013 is an absolute reference because I'm always going to be dividing by that same number. So about 18% was spent on rent and utilities, and I can just click and drag this down. I'm just going to click and drag this down to the bottom so we can calculate percents for everything. I'm going to click on these two cells that have zeros and press delete to get rid of them because they don't need to be there. All right, we are almost done with this document. But this is still messy because dollars and cents don't look like dollars and cents, and my percentages here don't really look like percentages. Let's clean this up. So I'm going to click and drag to the bottom here, and I'm going to change all of these to the percentage number format. And that makes it really clear how much money I spent on different things. Isn't it interesting that cell phones seem expensive, but compared to all of the other things we spend money on, it's only 1% of my net income for the year? Whereas rent was 18%, and the other big one is groceries. Food costs a lot of money. 52% of my income was spent on things, cost of living, and 48% of it was saved. These two numbers should add up to 100%, right? Because if I didn't spend it, I saved it, and that's 100% of my net income. All right, the next thing we're going to do, let's make all of these number formatted items. Now notice I have a total in here. Let's see what happens to that when I click number formatting for everything else. So I'm going to click on that. Notice that it knew that total, this word, wasn't a number, so it didn't affect the formatting of the word at all. But everything else now looks much nicer because it is set up to look like numbers, like money. All right. The last few things I'm going to do to make this look nice, I'm going to merge and center the title up above by clicking and dragging all these cells. I'm going to click merge and center, and then I'm going to increase the font several times to make this look a little bit nicer. So we'll probably go with 24-point font. That looks good. Maybe I'll also bold it, and then just do what it takes to make your spreadsheet look nice. I'll probably take all of my titles and make them bold so they're easy to keep track of. I'll do that with my row titles along the left as well. Maybe I want to make these specific deductions for my gross income look nice by indenting them by clicking on the increase indent button. Same with my expenses. I'll go up here and I'll increase the indent. Maybe I want to be really fancy schmancy, and within my different tables, I can click and drag all the way across the bunch of numbers here, and I can click to change the color of the background. Maybe I want to use a grayscale background in every other row of numbers so that it's easier for your eye to track across the page. So I could do that if I wanted to with the rows that contain numbers. So there's different things that you can do to make this look nice. Just do what you can so that this spreadsheet looks as neat as you can possibly make it by the end. Hopefully you understand even a little more now about how to use Excel. Most importantly from this lesson, you got a little bit more practice using Excel to create a spreadsheet. Please, as always, let me know if you have any questions on anything that I showed you here.